Many people today are waking up to the evils of Zionism, but very few realize who the real puppet masters are behind the scenes. Today, you're going to learn who those puppet masters are and why Zionism was created, which is ultimately to serve the beast. Welcome to the show, everybody. You're listening to the Dance of Life podcast, and I'm your host, Tudor Alexander. Welcome to this very important episode. I thought I was done making videos about Zionism, and I am, but I thought I would make one more, one-stop shop where you can get all of the important info to help your friends wake up from the spell that is being put on them with the controlled demolition of the Zionist and dispensational agenda that is very active right now in the world. So hopefully this video will be very edifying to you and to your friends who are getting quote-unquote Jew-pilled. All of the evil, all of the Zionist, all of the Jewish power shenanigans that have been going on and that now people are waking up to are actually a very carefully crafted narrative and controlled demolition to ultimately bring people back to Catholicism. If that sounds absolutely crazy to you right now, then please stick around for this video and indulge the other resources that are cited in here. The Bible says that Satan gave his power and great authority and his throne to Rome. And a big part of Rome's efforts in the world in the last 500 years especially have been the Jesuits. Of course, it's not just the Jesuits. You also have the Knights of Malta. You have other Catholic orders. You have other secret societies like Freemasons, Illuminati, all these types of things. They're all one shadow government that works behind the scenes. The Synagogue of Satan. I talk about this in my Synagogue of Satan, which I'm going to put this video as a kind of addendum or bonus right at the end of that series. It'll be part of it. But nevertheless, today I want to lay out a kind of like a lightning round of facts so that you can be equipped to discuss this with your friends and to help them out of the deception because they're being baited by all of the Jew hatred and Zionist, anti-Zionist propaganda, which it is propaganda. Propaganda has some truth to it, right? That's why it's effective. But of course, it takes the truth and veers you off the narrow road. So today you will learn that truth and have a more nuanced understanding of the evil that is in the world and also, very importantly, the direction of history, because most people are deceived by the direction of history. We're going to look at things that you can find easily online. I'm not doing any super crazy, PDF book research here. You can do that on your own. I'll cite some books that you can use. But nevertheless, we're going to look at very easily discoverable things that are public information and show you the truth that you can just see for yourself. It's important to remember that Satan has many tentacles in the world, and one of them is Zionism. It is the Talmud, it is Judaism, and it is all these Antichrist things. And every tentacle has a purpose, my friends. Every tentacle has a purpose. This is something you need to understand about Satan. Satan is not chaotic. He's not stupid. Okay, he's not haphazard. He is the most cunning being that God has ever created. The devil is extremely calculating. He's very brilliant and intelligent, and he's very conniving. So he doesn't just do things just to do them. Everything has a purpose. So every one of his tentacles in the world, whether it's atheism or Zionism or Freemasonry or whatever else, it always has a purpose. And for him, that purpose is to ultimately receive worship. So everything that he created, every psyop that's ever been created, has a purpose to ultimately serve that end time goal. And of course, the Bible tells you very importantly that he will be successful at the very end for a short time, but nevertheless, he will be successful. That means that all of these things are being integrated into that final outcome. The devil did many evil things through Talmudic Judaism. He baited the Jews into many evil things that you can look into yourself. Coin clipping, poisoning the wells, usury, blood libel, Kabbalah, many things that you can't even talk on YouTube about. And I won't talk about them because I don't need to talk about them. You can look into them yourself. But nevertheless, these things are probably a little more well-known now with all the shenanigans going around with Israel and the Middle East. But nevertheless, all of these things now, what was the purpose? What was the purpose? If no psyop of the devil is ever wasted, and the devil is not chaotic but extremely calculated, what was the purpose for doing all of these evil things through the Jews and baiting them into all these Antichrist activities? Well, the purpose, my friends, is very simple. Satan did it so that he could ultimately have a cakewalk in using the Jews as a scapegoat. When the Jews said, "We have no king but Caesar," and pledged their fealty to the power of the Antichrist on earth, which of course that was the succession of the satanic throne throughout history, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. When Jews pledged their power to Rome, "We have no king but Caesar," their fate was sealed. The Jews who rejected Jesus, their fate was sealed to be intertwined with the devil. And that's been the case, and you'll learn that, again today, throughout history. So the Jews are just a scapegoat, and they're going to be a very easy scapegoat. Do you get it? All of the evil things that I listed off and that you're learning through the news and all the mainstream things that are going mainstream now, that it's coming on this undercurrent that is bubbling up through the surface. All of these things are so easy. They're so obviously evil that, of course, if you question them and you say, well, it's not entirely the Jews, it's more nuanced than that, people will look at you funny and, think that you're a dispensationalist or whatever. It's not true. Just like when you point to Trump and you say, well, Trump's not the good guy, people think, oh, you're a Democrat? It's not how things work, my friends. Both sides are controlled, and everything that's happening to you in the media that's being revealed is a controlled situation. The devil is the god of this world. He is not going to be exposed on mainstream awareness. The majority of people are going to be deceived. So the things that you're seeing in the mainstream media, where they are exposing the Jews and all of this undercurrent of evil activity, and people are starting to realize, oh my gosh, we're getting Jew-pilled. Do you really think that that's the final thing? Like we found it, we found the heart of darkness and everybody's waking up to the devil's schemes? Or is it just a controlled demolition to bait you in a particular direction with a little carrot of things that are true to ultimately do a bait and switch and flip you into the final trick? The collapse of Zionism is going to be used, and it's being used to destroy Protestantism once and for all, and ultimately to destroy the Jewish identity so that it can be reinvented in Catholicism. Once the Jews are converted, there will be no more obstacle to enforcing obedience to the pontiff through Sunday sacredness, through this religious delusion, through this religious system. There'll be no more obstacle, folks. The Jews are a real problem for the devil. Of course, he had that plan from the very beginning because he knew that the Sabbath is a command. The devil knows God's word better than everybody else. He knows that the Sabbath is God's special day, that that's what identifies God's people when they rest in him also physically. And he knew that by getting the Jews to do all of these evil things, he could make the Sabbath seem like such a disgusting, despicable thing that you never want to do. And that was the point. If you study the early church history, which I have in my Lord's Day series, a 17-hour, 18-hour series or something like that, You can learn lots and lots of history in that series. How there's nothing new under the sun. In the beginning, when the church was being persecuted by the Roman Empire, and there was pressure on the Christians not to look like the Jews, because at first, actually, the Jews were persecuting their own kind, and then the Jews revolted and the Romans started persecuting the Jews. So throughout this whole time, there was a lot of pressure on God's people to not do the Jewish thing. Don't be like the Jews. Don't be like those, evil Jews that are revolting or being gluttons or being legalists. So many different ways that the devil used the Jews as scapegoats to make the Sabbath seem so undesirable and wicked, or, like the ceremonial system or whatever else. Legalistic. Resting in God is a delight. We're not legalists by enjoying a day off from work and from spending time mindfully with God, with gratitude on our mind, exploring nature, studying the Bible more, having fellowship. These are wonderful, beautiful things that help you reset, and they give you strength. And at the end of time, my friends, whether you like it or not, the Antichrist power will come back into the world. It's already in the world, but it will be back in the sense that people are going to marvel after this power. And this power is going to want obedience. And one of the main ways that it will obtain obedience, and it has obtained obedience historically, is by enforcing its own way of worship, which is to stop activity on Sunday, the first day of the week. I am not an Adventist. It's not about Sunday laws. It's about obedience. And if you understand history and the direction of history, you understand why this is going to be such an issue and why the Jews need to be converted so that they can destroy all options for you to hide. Because once the Jews convert and you have these rabbis that are saying they saw the light of the Eucharist and they saw the light of Sunday now, and Jesus is our Lord, and we're going to rest with him on Sunday because that's the resurrection day. Join the new covenant. When you have all these rabbis pointing the finger at you and calling you a Judaizer, and people calling you demonically possessed or a heretic or whatever else, you know that the time will be near. So whether you listen to me right now or you find my words foolishness or you get insulted by what I say, that is up to God. I hope that God will open your eyes and open your ears if you're listening to this and help you see what you need to see, because there are more. It's not as simple as it's being made to seem. Zionism is very evil. Dispensationalism is a delusion. I've talked about these things hours upon hours upon hours in my various videos on end times materials. But there's more behind the scenes. There's an evil power that seems like it is the will of God on earth. And that evil power is Rome and the papacy. And that papacy, that unit that controls the Jesuits, of course, people say, is it the Jesuit general? Is it the Pope? Is it the papal families? Who cares, really? It doesn't matter. At that point, they're all in communion with the devil. But Rome is the one that controls the world, folks. And you need to learn your history. And today, my goal would be to help you do that. So subscribe, like, share, comment, share with your friends, help them out of the delusion. It's kind of like that movie Maze Runner. I don't know if you've ever seen it. There's actually a few of them, but kind of spoiler alert. They get out of this maze and then they wake up that are another maze. And so that's the way this whole thing works with psyops after psyops after psyops. People are waking up to the psyop of dispensationalism and Christian Zionism. And if you're not careful, the next psyop is there ready to devour you. And that's my goal with this video, is to help people come out of one psyop and avoid the other. Because the entire point of revealing to you part of the truth is to devour you with the next thing. So don't be devoured. Soon we'll have to worry about these things a little more, but nevertheless, God will be with us. So do not panic, but rejoice. Rejoice, because as you see these things come to pass, as you see a charismatic revival in the Middle East, as you see Sunday laws worldwide, as you see a technocratic image of the beast coming to life, religion and politics merging, as you see more monarchical styles of ruling, these things are signs of the very, very end. And that is something to rejoice. I don't think the world has more than 10 years. I could be wrong. But nevertheless, I don't see the world going into the 2040s. Let's put it that way. So the time is near, and we have to evangelize people in the meantime from things like dispensationalism, Christian Zionism, even lukewarm Protestantism, having a more narrow faith, or conservatives, people who are, hardcore trad, whatever, traditional, and getting quote unquote Jew pilled. They're actually getting Catholic pilled, my friends. They're actually getting Catholic pilled. You think you're getting Jew pilled, you're actually getting Catholic pilled if you're not careful. It's like you got a pill and it's actually something that you don't think it is. So there's a lot to talk about, and we're going to lay this out in historical order. I've talked about these in my Synagogue of Satan series, my End Time series, my Great Delusion series, my Venerable Day of the Sun episodes. I have a lot of videos on these types of topics. So I'm not going to cite every absolute thing I'm talking about here. I'm going to have some sources that we're going to look at. We have lots of sources, but nevertheless, I'm not going to document every single thing because I've documented it in other places. My point is just to give you a lightning round type of narrative so that you understand from point A to point B what's actually going on with this whole thing. If you want the video or the notes, you can access that in the library. You can either purchase the library now or you can download it. Now, let's talk about from 70 AD to about 1600 AD, give or take. After the temple was destroyed, the Jews were obviously dispersed and they went to different parts of the world. After that, they had other revolts like the Bar Kokhba revolt, and I forget the other one, but nevertheless, there were these other revolts, these people that were coming around, they're messianic figures and trying to lead an army against the Roman power. And of course, they failed. They failed miserably and they were totally destroyed and they had to flee and disperse and everything else. Many Jews fled to Europe, especially the noble families, and they took their craft of building various things like masonry with them. And of course, that created operant Freemasonry. Freemasonry, if you look into it, was originally a Jewish thing. It was a Jewish thing. They had their esoteric, architectural understandings, and they brought that into Europe. Eventually, a couple hundred years down the line, the original Templars had some Jewish blood in them, and that was a part of their motivation for going to Jerusalem, to going back and doing the crusade, because they wanted to find the treasures that their families had left behind. But anyway, for 1,500 years, the Jews were nobody. By and large, they were nobody. They were a ragtag, nomadic group of people. They were kicked out of 100-plus countries for all their shenanigans that I mentioned earlier. And everybody knew and hated the Jews. They hated the Jews, and they had good reason to hate the Jews. Christianity had no sense, absolutely zero sense, that the Jews would return to their homeland and build their own state again, because they believed that God was done with the Jews. That was a very clear thing in Scripture and also in history. Various false messiahs came at different times, like I said, from even after 70 AD, all the way through, the 1500s, 1600s. And all of these false messiahs basically, had national ambitions. They wanted to rally the Jews and have a nation again to some degree. But these things were not mainstream. They never really got off the ground. You can't say that they were actually mobilizing the Jews into some huge thing where there's this giant immigration towards the Holy Land and they're trying to set up a state. That never really happened. They were just these philosophers and writers, and they had, very little success. Nevertheless, the Jews always wanted a materialistic salvation. Even in Jesus' time, the Jews were obsessed with returning back to the empire that they had with Solomon. They thought Jesus was coming to usher in a golden age. Sound familiar? And basically, take care of the Romans and everything else. So the Jews always had that desire, and they still have that desire today. And that's an important point to remember, because that desire was manipulated by the powers that be to create the current movement of Zionism, which of course is also being collapsed. So the question is, what changed? What changed that is so important? Well, I'll tell you what changed, and that change was the Reformation. The Reformation was a serious problem for the papacy, for the beast, because it threatened to destroy its hold over the world. Especially you had the printing press. At the time, you were also dealing with the Ottoman Empire. People were leaving, to the Americas. It was a mess. It was a total mess. So the Jesuits were formed in the 1500s, 1534, to basically take care of this problem. The Jesuits were the, like the CIA secret ops, PSYOP division of the Vatican. Of course, the Vatican didn't necessarily exist as the Vatican at that time, but of the papacy. And their role was to infiltrate Governments infiltrate Protestantism, assassinate people, shape culture, create revolutions, do anything possible to stop this problem and to bring ultimately people back to the Catholic Church. One of their first orders of business was to change how people interpreted Bible prophecy. Because obviously, if the interpretation that the Catholic Church is the system of Antichrist and the papacy is the man of sin, that's a real problem. You can't really operate in the daylight if people are looking at you and say, hey, there's the devil. And so that's a real problem. So they had to do it in such a way where the Catholic Church was not the enemy, and the Catholic Church and the Jesuits could hide in plain daylight and do their shenanigans and operate without being discovered. So you had key Jesuits, Francisco Ribera, Manuel Lacunza, Robert Bellarmine, all created modern Jewish-focused futurism, which really is dispensationalism. They wrote these various treatises and commentaries on Revelation and basically created the idea of, the 7 years of tribulation, the state of Israel, the third rebuilt Jewish temple, all these types of things that eventually made their way into Protestantism. And I talk about that in my Great Delusion series quite a bit, so you can check that out. There's also Luis de Alcazar, who wrote the first commentary on Revelation as a preterist. There were some scant, handful of people maybe before him, probably about 100, 150 years before him, that were preterists, and they had some preterist ideas. But look, any preterists love to say, people talked about preterism as far back as Eusebius. Eusebius was not a preterist, man. Eusebius's commentary on, Luke 21 or Matthew 24 being about the destruction of the temple does not mean that Eusebius was a preterist. Okay? If people were preterists, and the majority of Christians were preterist, then there would have been no reason to get Revelation back in the canon. Revelation was the last book to be added in the canon, okay? And by the way, it was written after 70 AD, but nevertheless, I talk about that in my End Time series. But nevertheless, it was added to the canon in like the 4th century. It was the final book to be added. Why would it be added if people thought that the Bible or the Revelation, the book of Revelation, had to do with the Jews in the past? Yes, Matthew 24 and Luke 21 have some preterist fulfillment in the sense that they are having to do with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. That's not all they have to do with, because there's double fulfillment. There are double issues going on there. But Eusebius recognizing that was part of that was having to do with the destruction of the temple, anybody can do that. That's obvious. So that doesn't make him a preterist. So why is this important? It's important because for the most of church's history, nobody was a preterist. Nobody thought that all of these warnings of Thessalonians, Revelation, Daniel, everything else had to do with the Jews in the past. Until really Luis de Alcazar published his commentary on Revelation and eventually infiltrated Protestantism with that as well. So nowadays, a lot of people are preterists and they don't realize that preterism is a false teaching and it's designed to take your attention off the Antichrist power and move you into the New World Order, the New World counterfeit Christian order. But anyway, I digress. It's important to understand that both futurism and preterism were alive before these Jesuits. Futurism was kind of the more common way people were interpreting Revelation, but they didn't have this idea of, the third rebuilt temple, a Jewish state, 7-year tribulation. This is all nonsense. They did believe in a literal 1,000-year millennial reign, and there was some future sense to that. Of course, you can't blame them. They didn't have that much historical context. Like the early church fathers, when they were reading these things, they didn't have that much historical context, so they read it literally. And that was generally the idea that Jesus would return, he would install a government for 1,000 years, and, basically that would be a golden age type of thing. So that was generally how people understood Revelation. The Jesuits took that and weaponized it and turned it towards the focus towards Judaism and Jews and Israel and everything else. Preterism, same thing. Like I said, there were people before Luis de Alcazar, but then after him, he really took that and weaponized it. But the point is this, they weaponized these things and they put people's attention either to the future or to the past. That's how the devil works. There's a narrow road, either to the right or to the left. And once you see that pattern, you can sniff out all of the devil's schemes anywhere you go, because it's very obvious. Nobody was therefore looking in the present moment and in present history to understand what is actually happening. And Satan's kingdom was able to be cloaked because they deceived the world into these various false eschatologies. Eventually, people like Manuel Lacunza, which, by the way, Manuel Lacunza, he wrote his commentary on Revelation through a pen name, a Jewish pen name. I think it was Rabbi something Ben Yosef or something like that. So a Jesuit is pretending to be a Jew to get his basically commentary out there and avoid any responsibility. So that should tell you everything. But nevertheless, that commentary eventually reached people like Irving and Darby in the Plymouth Brethren in England, and the rest, as they say, is history. Schofield was probably a Freemason. At the very least, he was promoted by Freemasons. He was also a puppet of the Rothschilds. And of course, everybody knows about the Rothschilds and the Oxford Press and all of these things that are so controversial. But most people don't realize that the Rothschilds are actually the guardians of the papal treasure. Rothschild, that means red shield. So let's read about the Rothschild really quick. This is a site I've looked at before. It's called The Rothschilds or Jesuits. And you can look at it. Now I think the website is down, so I'm using the the Wayback Machine. But I'm not going to read every single thing on here. I'm just going to read a few quotes, and there's a lot on here. I've cited it before, I think, in my Synagogue of Satan series. You can read it yourself, but I'll cite to you a few of these. If you are not American, you will understand why your country is on its present course, as it too is controlled by the Jesuit general through his select Jesuits, Knights of Malta, Shriner Freemasons, and Knights of Columbus, and the Illuminati's Masonic, Kabbalistic, Labor, Zionist, Sabbatian, Frankist, named after the Black Popes baptized Jacob Frank, Jewish House of Rothschild. For the order controlled the infamous House of Rothschild since no later than the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars, after which Jesuit-led crusade the Rothschild family was surnamed the Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. That's Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins. Let's see, there's a couple here I highlighted. International finance and banking are not primarily Jewish. Many of the most powerful banking interests in the world are run by Gentiles. One of the most powerful forces in international banking is the Knights of Malta, a Roman Catholic military order controlled by the Jesuit Superior General. Sadly, even a certain segment of the alternative media helps to propagate the lie that the Jews run international banking. Interestingly, one of the titles of the Rothschild banking dynasty is Guardians of the Vatican Treasury. The Jews as a people have been used for centuries as a scapegoat by these international banksters and their secret societies, such as the Jesuit-controlled Knights of Malta. To label the Jews as running banking, Hollywood, etc., is to throw out the proverbial red herring designed to throw us off the scent of the real controllers. Yeah, Hollywood, most people don't realize that Hollywood was started by Jesuits and Catholics, and the Jesuits are the ones who practiced and invented the idea of projecting an image onto a screen or a wall like 100, 150 years before Hollywood was started. And they were the ones that owned all the theaters in Europe, and they were shaping culture to basically bring people back to this Catholic ideal, just like they're doing today. Of course, they let Hollywood become liberal, and they let the Jews go to town so that now there could be a scapegoat. Do you get it? One more, I think the Rothschilds were Jesuits who used their Jewish background as a fause to cover their sinister activities. The Jesuits, working through Rothschild and financier Nicholas Biddle, sought to gain control of the banking system in the United States. The Jesuits used Biddle and the Rothschild to gain the upper hand in American banking because they knew they could control the people and effectively rewrite the Constitution according to papal law. Jackson was trying to stop them. We have already seen that the Rothschilds were the banking agents for the papacy's church. These three financial families, the Rothschilds, Morgans, and Rockefellers, all do the bidding of the Jesuit order because of the Jesuit infiltration in their organizations. They do whatever is necessary to destroy constitutional liberty in America and to bring the Pope to world domination. As we look back over the 20th century, we see how successful the Jesuits have been. They have continued to squander the wealth of America and continually attack its great constitution and civil liberties. Daily, the power of the Pope in the Vatican City increases. One day, they will achieve total power again. Does the Bible say that? Absolutely. So that's in alignment with what the Bible says. That's Bill Hughes, The Secret Terrorists. It's a great book. One more, seldom is it mentioned that the Rothschilds, along with other Western bankers and industrialists, financed the rise of Hitler as a bulwark against the Soviets. The ultra-right wing falsely describes the Rothschilds as Jewish bankers when in fact the Rothschilds are interwoven with the Catholic Church and jointly with the traditional mafia and the American CIA, interlocked with the Vatican Bank, which was pro-Nazi. Which, by the way, the CIA, you'll find out today, was founded by Knights of Columbus, Knights of Malta members. And of course, the Rothschilds are interwoven with the Catholic Church. Here's an example of that. David René de Rothschild, Baron David James de Rothschild, born December yada yada, is a French banker and a member of the French branch of the Rothschild family. Since 2018, he is supervisory board chairman of Rothschild & Company and chairman of the Rothschild Continuation Holdings in the Swiss holding company. So let's see if we can find where he was married to. Aldobrandini. Here we go. There it is. Spouse, Princess Olympia Anna Aldobrandini. Aldobrandini, if you know your history, that is one of the papal families, one of the elite papal families, like the Medici, like what's the other ones? Firenze or whatever their name is. Anyway, there's a lot of them. I think there's like 12 or 13 of them. Orsini. Aldobrandini is married to Mr. Rothschild. So what does that mean? That means that these two threads are interwoven by the devil. And of course, it's not just the Jews. The Jews are just a scapegoat because ultimately Satan needs to destroy that to integrate his system. So if you want some further reading on all of these things, check out Bill Hughes, The Secret Terrorists, Eric John Phelps, Vatican Assassins, Tupper Saucy, Rulers of Evil. These are all very well documented books that talk about these things in great depth. Rothschild means red shield in German. So they are the shield. They're the shield of the papacy. In other words, you can think of them as the scapegoat. They're the scapegoat, the shield that protects the dragon and the dragon's wealth. Rothschild became a thing during the French Revolution because the Jesuits were kicked out of many countries for starting revolutions. Sound familiar? They were kicked out of, I think, 100-something countries. They were extorting tons of money. They had their, what do you call it? Oh, what's the name of those little bases in the reductions? The reductions in South America. They had the reductions in South America where they were practicing basically Catholic communism, oppressing the Guarani Indians there and basically being treated as gods and extorting them millions, probably, I mean, in today's world, probably billions and billions of dollars worth of, trade and everything that they were extorting. And the monarchs found out about it. They realized that they were running this entire kingdom under the nose of all these monarchs and doing whatever they wanted with it. So they kicked the Jesuits out. And of course, this was a real problem for the Jesuits because they, needed to have control. And so they realized, okay, we need to get rid of these monarchs. We need to get rid of these monarchs and create a situation where there's a temporary way that we can basically fool everybody into thinking that they're in control, but we're actually in control until the plan is complete and we can go back to a monarchical system. So the Jesuits fomented the French Revolution. I have a whole episode on that. I've talked about that quite a bit. But they used secret societies plus central banking to infiltrate countries, create revolutions, lend money to both sides, and ultimately take control of both parties doing that. So central banking plus infiltration and revolutions, that was their formula. And they did that over and over and over again since the French Revolution in many places. Meanwhile, Protestantism was completely oblivious to these things because of its destroyed eschatology. They were looking at the Jews and dispensationalism and all the nonsense that was happening in the 1800s. So the Reformation changed the direction of the Jews as a people because Satan had to hide his empire on earth. The Jesuits, many original Jesuits were Jews, by the way, before they had the blood laws. But the Jesuits were formed to infiltrate and destroy Protestantism. And because of the climate in Europe, with the monarchs hating the Jesuits and turning on them, the revolution needed to happen. Something needed to change. We need a new system of government. That's why the French Revolution basically installed this system that we have today, which is the two-party system. You have democracy, quote unquote, which is, left side and right side. You have conservative, liberal. But these are just dialectics, folks. These are dialectics to give people the illusion of free will and basically the illusion of self-governance, which really allowed them to infiltrate their people into these governments, control the agenda, while you, as a goyim looking on the outside, think, oh, wow, it's going to the left, it's going to the right, I got to vote more next time, or whatever else. And the agenda is still going the direction they want it to, but you have the illusion that basically it's, being led by the people. Just like they used, or I should say, just like they destroyed eschatology to blind the Protestants from the true danger on the earth, the two-party system blinded people to the hidden hand behind the scenes, which of course are secret societies, the Jesuits, and so on. Atheism was also created as an opposite to Catholicism. Ultimately, the role of atheism and ultimately communism was to destroy society and destroy everything that was sacred, destroy the family, destroy sexuality, destroy everything, so that Catholicism and Catholic social teaching could come in and rescue it. See my videos on the Jesuits and communism, especially in the Synagogue of Satan series, the chapter on that. Communism is not a Jewish thing, folks. It's not. The Jesuits developed communism for 150 plus years before the French Revolution, and they got very good at it. Once the French Revolution happened, they were instrumental in exporting it eventually to China, Vietnam, Russia, South America, and so on. And I document all of that in my video. Does that mean the Jews weren't involved? Absolutely not. The Jews were definitely present. But one thing that people don't realize is that the Jews who were present were secret society pawns that couldn't care less about actual Jews. If you look at pictures of Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, all these people, they all had pictures with their hands in their coat. Okay, they're Freemasons. Okay, they're secret society, devil-loving Jews. And they're not really, you can't even call them Jews, really. They're just, who knows if what level of genetics they have, whether they're Ashkenazi or something else, but they're people who say they're one thing and they're not. Synagogue of Satan. The Synagogue of Satan is not just the Jews. It is people who say they are followers of God, because the Muslims have secret societies too. The Jews have secret societies too. The Christians have secret societies. Everybody has a secret that they hold, and they're saying, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim, I love God, or whatever else. And on the back end, they're all holding hands and worshiping the devil. So this is what you're dealing with, folks. You're dealing with a duplicitous system. But nevertheless, the Jews are present, and of course, today they are the scapegoats of communism and the communist things. But if you dig deep enough, there's always a hidden hand behind these things. All of these people were puppets. They were secret society members with multiple identities and duplicitous ways of being. Nevertheless, the French Revolution was an inflection point in history, a very important inflection point. Because, why? Well, because of several reasons. It created the two-party system to move the agenda forward while people are being ignorant and thinking that they're the ones controlling it. So that's deceptive government. Eventually, that two-party system would be so broken on purpose, which is what's happening now, that people will demand going back to monarchies. And of course, when they do demand a king, when they do demand monarchical rule, then by that point, everything's ready. The Jesuits have taken control of the world through Rothschild banking, central banking, revolutions, infiltrations, assassinations. They've done that very much over the last 250 plus years. And now they're ready. So that's why all of these things are collapsing, and we are going back to religion and politics being united. People wanting a more monarchical system of rule. People basically starting to hate the Jews again. All of these things are going backwards in time to where they used to be because everything is ready now. When the French Revolution happened, the monarchs were out of control. The Jesuits didn't have control over the world. So they had to subvert all these systems and then go back to them because they want monarchs. A monarch on the throne is much better than having, a two-party system. Are you kidding me? When you have a monarch that's a puppet pledging his power to the Pope, then that's way better for them. So they want monarchical rule. They want a monarchy. But the problem wasn't monarchy, it was the monarchs. Do you get it? So they had to destroy these systems, infiltrate all these governments, make sure their people are in power, make sure their banking system controls all the finances, and then they can call the shots and go back to their preferred system of government, which is monarchical system. Nevertheless, another thing that the French Revolution did was to create communism and, of course, destroy Christian countries like Europe, Latin America, and Russia, which all would set a precedent for Catholicism to come in and rescue them later. Religion, really, organized religion. Meanwhile, while they're doing all these things with, creating the two-party system, communism, they're subverting Protestantism with bad eschatology, infiltrators, to the point where you make Protestantism look so ridiculous between Christian Zionism, woke ideology, prosperity preaching, charismatic movement, all the things that have happened in the last, 150 plus years, that people will be so embarrassed of Protestantism, especially when the final card is toppled. And of course, that card is the Zionist card, which is happening now. As a result of Zionism's controlled demolition, people are discrediting Protestantism so hard that they are leaving in droves to Catholicism. And that's exactly the point. It's right on cue, folks. It's right on cue. The Zionist movement was also created during that time. We'll talk about this in just a little bit. But around that time, the Zionism was created so that the Jews would be the scapegoats for all these problems. And eventually, the point was to collapse Zionism in tandem with all of these other things, like collapsing liberalism, like collapsing Protestantism. All these things are collapsing in a very controlled and carefully orchestrated symphony, so that the final result is everybody marveling after the beast. This has been the agenda for the last 250 years, and I've talked about it many times in many places. It's all just been one giant dark to light. Now, let's talk about from approximately 1600 to the present. Many people think that Zionism began with Theodor Herzl, but hopefully you know differently by now, and hopefully you will share that with others as well. The Jews had many false messiahs, like I said, and national aspirations throughout time. Since Solomon's kingdom, the Jews always wanted to go back to that materialistic success. But it never became a thing until the power of the earth, which is Rome, had a need for it. Remember that historically Catholics have always hated the Jews and seen them as the scum of the earth. Okay? So why is it suddenly now that Catholicism, at least mainstream Catholicism, has been very pro-Jewish since Vatican II? I wonder why. Now, one of the first people who was credited with Zionism, who was Baruch Spinoza, was mentored by a Jesuit. Let's find out. This is on Wikipedia, Baruch Spinoza. He lived around in the mid-1600s. He's also known under his Latinized pen name as Benedictus de Spinoza, was a philosopher of Portuguese Jewish origin who was born in the Dutch Republic. A forerunner of the Age of Enlightenment, Spinoza significantly influenced modern biblical criticism, 17th century rationalism, and Dutch intellectual culture, establishing himself as one of the most important and radical philosophers of the early modern period. And I think I had, modern era. Let's see. Okay, modern era, Spinoza and Zionism. In the Tractatus Spinoza, said in passing about the Jews that, quote, were it not that the fundamental principles of their religious discourage manliness, I would not hesitate to believe that they will one day, given the opportunity, establish once more the independent state, that God will again choose them. This comment and Spinoza's general emphasis on the political national aspects of Judaism had inspired some of the secular forerunners of Zionism. Some Zionist leaders even describe Spinoza as the first secular proto-Zionist. Some scholars agree with the characterization of Spinoza as proto-Zionist, while others are critical of it. So he was one of the proto-Zionists. Now, again, there's going to be whitewashing and saying, oh, no, he wasn't really a Zionist. Well, obviously, these things were in threads and waves, and they got more intense as they came along. But he was one of the early, Jews that were really philosophizing, writing about this. Here's a man named Franciscan van Enden. He's known as Phineas Novembriatus, was a Flemish former Jesuit, Neo-Latin poet, physician, and art dealer, philosopher, and plotter against the Louis XIV of France. Born in Antwerp, he had a truncated career as a Jesuit and an art dealer. He moved later to Dutch Republic, where he became part of the group of radical thinkers, sometimes referred to as the Amsterdam Circle, who challenged prevailing views on politics and religion. Always stirring up trouble. He held strong ideas about education and viewed theater as an important teaching tool. There you go. This was how many years before Hollywood? 200, 300? He was a utopian, planning to set up an ideal society in Dutch colonies in America and a proponent of democracy and the administration of states. In other words, he was a Jesuit communist. He is best known as the Latin teacher of Spinoza, which we just looked at. So he was the mentor of Spinoza, with whom Spinoza boarded for a period. Scholars have examined Van Enden's philosophical ideas and those of Spinoza to assess whether he influenced his pupil. Spinoza biographer Stephen Nadler suggests this is not the case. Of course not. Spinoza biographer Jonathan I. Israel argues that Van Enden preceded Spinoza in writing radical philosophical texts with a combination of democratic republicanism, rejection of religious authority, and advocacy for basic equality, building on the influence of Pieter de la Court, but only after Spinoza left Amsterdam. Van Enden was also implicated in a plot against Louis XIV and executed by hanging. So, this is what you need to know, that ultimately one of the first Zionists ever to be recognized by the other Zionists was mentored by a Jesuit. Now, another important fact that is around that time, a little bit later, around the 1800s, is that Napoleon had a major part to play in Zionist movements, in the Zionist ideal, and creating a desire for the Jewish people to rebuild the temple and so on and so forth, by materializing that through various ways. Now, here's a picture. This is a picture. If you're listening to this, you can go to the presentation notes and access the link, but it's called Napoleon and the Jews by Ben Wider, PhD. There's this mural, or basically this engraving or whatever it is, and you have Napoleon here, where basically he's on this rock, and here are the Jews underneath him. They're all looking at him and marveling at him as their Messiah, and he's pointing them to the freedom, to the freedom on the horizon. What's on the horizon? You see basically this pyramid with lights emanating from it, and of course everybody knows what this means. But here you are. In this picture, you see everything you need to know. You have Napoleon, who was a Jesuit puppet, part of the French Revolution, and he's liberating the Jews and showing them the light. He's initiating them into this ideal of Zionism, of coming back and rebuilding their nation and rebuilding the Third Temple. The caption says, Napoleon was the first leader in Europe to grant liberty, equality, and fraternity to all religions. In this lithograph of the period, Napoleon is granting liberty to the Jews. What is he actually granting them? He's granting them the delusion of liberty. Look, you can be a nation again. Look, you can have your temple again. You can be a people again. You can have your materialistic salvation. That's exactly what's happening here. I won't read all of this. There's a lot actually in this page to read. We've read it before, but I want to read you just this little excerpt. How did Napoleon's involvement with the Jews come about? Napoleon Bonaparte had not met any Jews in his youth, and perhaps not even during his school years in France. His first contact with the organized Jewish community probably took place on the 9th of February 1797 in Italy during the Italian campaign. When Napoleon and his army entered Ancona, the Jewish community was living in a small ghetto. Napoleon at that time remarked that certain people were walking around with yellow bonnets and a yellow armband with the Star of David on it. Does that sound familiar to you? Let's say 150 years before Hitler. And anyway, he asked one of his officers what was the purpose of the yellow bonnet and the armband. The officer replied that these were the Jews who had been identified in order that they return to the ghetto every evening. Napoleon immediately ordered that the armbands and the yellow bonnets be removed and replaced them with the tricolor rosette. He closed the ghettos and gave instructions that the Jews should live wherever they wanted and they could practice their religion openly. The Jews of Ancona were overjoyed when they discovered that the first soldiers who entered the ghetto were Jewish. Later, Napoleon also closed the Jewish ghetto in Rome. He liberated also the Jews of Venice, Verona, and Padua. So remember when you learn about Hitler in World War II, that the first people to create ghettos and put armbands on people were Rome. The liberator of Italy abolished the laws of Inquisition, and the Jews felt free at last. There you go. There's the Messiah. Why did Napoleon do this? I wonder why he did it. Did he have a motive? And yet, here's another incident of interest. On the 12th of June of 1798, when the French occupied Malta, Napoleon learned that the Templar Knights did not allow the Jews to practice their religion in a synagogue. The Knights enslaved their Jewish prisoners and mercilessly used them or sold them. He immediately gave permission to the Jews to build a synagogue. So, remember that this is what the Catholics actually think about the Jews. The Knights Templar abused the Jews. They had slaves. They were selling them. They were trafficking them. Nothing new under the sun. What could Napoleon's motive be? Now, here's an amazing incident which is not generally known. Now it's going to be generally known to you. When the French troops were in Palestine and besieging the city of Acre, Napoleon had already prepared a proclamation, making Palestine an independent Jewish state. He felt confident that he could occupy Acre, and the following days he would enter Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem he would issue this proclamation. He was unable to realize this project because of the intervention of the British. This proclamation was printed and dated 20th of April, 1799, but his unsuccessful attempt to capture Acre prevented it from being issued. The Jews had to wait more than 150 years before their state was proclaimed. The proclamation, however, did bear fruit. It was a precursor to Zionism, heightening the awareness of the cause of Jewish statehood. The ideas Napoleon expressed found the admiration of many who saw Napoleon's gestures as a fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Now, of course, we're in the 1800s now, so why are people seeing that as fulfillment of Bible prophecy? Because, well, first off, the Jews had their own nationalistic ambitions, but the Christians also said, oh, okay, well, now, there's dispensationalism, and that's taking over the world around that time. Of course, dispensation really came around a little bit later, but nevertheless, these things were out in the world because of the Jesuits before that, who were in the 1600s, 1700s, and so on, which foretells the restoration of the Jews to their land. The idea drew many adherents, especially in England, which, of course, was the precursor to the Plymouth Brethren, Derby, Irving, etc. 118 years later, the British would issue the Balfour Declaration, which called for a Jewish homeland, and ultimately 31 years later, in 1948, Israel would be recognized as a sovereign state by popular vote in the United Nations General Assembly, which, by the way, the vote was 33-13. Tells you both sides of the occult were basically in on that shenanigan. Perhaps it can be said that Napoleon's premature announcement on that first day of Passover in 1799 played an important role in the creation of the State of Israel. Perhaps. I would say so. In the Paris Monteneur Universelle on 3 Prairial of Year 7, basically 1789, it was announced, Bonaparte has published a proclamation in which he invites all the Jews of Asia and Africa to gather under his flag in order to re-establish the ancient Jerusalem. He has already given arms to a great number, and their battalions threaten Aleppo. On the 16th of August, 1800, Napoleon declared, if I governed a nation of Jews, I should re-establish the Temple of Solomon. Bet you didn't know that about history, did you? So, there you can read more about that on your own, but nevertheless, suddenly after the Reformation, you start seeing more and more Zionist threads. You see more and more, whether in the world, pushing into Christianity, in Protestantism, and so on. Napoleon was a Jesuit puppet, and he was famous for many things, but a lot of people don't realize that he was also very popular with the Jews for liberating the Jews and giving them this nationalistic ambition, serving as a messianic figure, which they have always lusted after because they rejected the true Messiah, and of course, playing to all their worldly desires. He also has a famous quote about the Jesuit order being a military order because they have a general, they're not priests, they report to a general, and of course that means they're a military order. So Napoleon knew what the Jesuits were, and he was also basically a pawn of the Jesuits. But nevertheless, that picture of where he's initiating the Jews into this false light reality of basically nationalism, that was the beginning of all of these things, folks. That was the beginning. And of course, the theological beginning was with the Jesuits and their reversal of the Bible prophecies. But within 100 years of these things, 150 years, you start seeing movements, great movements through Napoleon, through these various things that happened to prop up this system of Zionism, which all happened around the time of the French Revolution. The Jesuits knew exactly what the Jews wanted, and they gave it to them. Napoleon was ready to build a third temple 150 plus years ago, 200 years ago. But of course, he got stopped by the British, and the various tentacles of the devil weren't all coordinated and playing along. So, of course, that took a little more time to basically get to the point where everybody was subjugated. But nevertheless, all the Third Temple stuff that you see today, please remember that it's not new. It's been going on for at least 200 years. They have been trying to do this for at least 200 years. And of course, they're going to probably be successful. I don't know if they're actually going to build this temple or not, but they certainly have talked it up. As of the time of this video, the Temple Institute released a thing that, the heifers that we had aren't disqualified. They're not going to work anymore. So that's really interesting to me. Some people say that they're lying about it and they're basically just trying to do this in secret. Who knows whether they're going to do that? We know that this narrative has been a long time coming. So we'll see what happens. But nevertheless, the original attempt failed. And after subjugating Europe with the Rothschild banking, with revolutions, especially England, 150 years later, 120 years later, they had the Balfour Declaration and then the State of Israel. And everybody played along. So that's that. After Napoleon's liberal attitudes to the Jews and basically liberalizing the Jews and creating these nationalistic ambitions, and being frustrated and not happening, what you had was a lot of countries in Europe vacillated. They vacillated after Napoleon, whether they wanted to align with his reforms or go back to, basically, hating the Jews and ostracizing them. So Europe was very divided after Napoleon's efforts, and that was by design. These dialectics were by design to create an environment of, pro-Jew, anti-Jew, pro-Jew, anti-Jew. And this environment is where people like Moses Hess and eventually Theodor Herzl grew up in. They grew up in this environment that got started by Napoleon, who was a Jesuit puppet. So all of these things were on purpose, and of course, they created the perfect environment for these other Jews to come along and basically start writing more and more. Just like Baruch, all of these people started writing more and creating various texts on Zionism. And of course, Theodor Herzl, everybody knows about Theodor Herzl, but nobody seems to know that Theodor Herzl hated being a Jew and wanted to be a Christian, a quote-unquote Christian, a Catholic. Here's a quote from his diary. It says, "A way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism was to speak to the head priest of Vienna to get an appointment with the Pope to make a mass conversion of all the Jews of Austria to Catholicism. It should be done on a Sunday in the middle of the day with music, pride, and publicly. We are the last generation that held to the faith of our fathers. The conversion would be in St. Stephen's Cathedral." So if you read about Theodor Herzl, he did not like being a Jew. He hated being ostracized. He fantasized about being a Catholic and about basically being, part of society as a quote-unquote Christian. And he very much was ready to convert the Jews and basically make them Catholics so that they could have their own little sandbox to play in. And that was the point. Now, the first meetings of the Zionist Congress were in Switzerland. This is the first Zionist Congress, was inaugural, yada, 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 was in Basel, Switzerland, 1897. Same thing with the Second Zionist Congress, was in Basel, Switzerland. Now, if you look into Switzerland, it's a very interesting country. The flag is this solar cross, equilateral cross, on a red flag. And of course, if you look into the Knights Templar, they have the same exact symbol. They have a nice little solar cross. This is the solar cross that everybody has on their little cakes. Of course, these are nothing new. In the Bible, they had their little cakes. They put little solar crosses on it. People worship Baal, worship the sun. This is nothing new under the sun. This is the sovereign military order of Malta with their red flag and the white little solar cross on it. So what am I getting at? I'm getting at is that there's a lot of evidence that some Templars, when they were accused of all the things that they were doing, all the nasty things that they were doing, like satanic worship and orgies and blasphemy and all the things that they were doing after they got their quote-unquote treasures, their Kabbalah treasures from the Holy Land, a lot of them left and ran away in different places. Some Templars went north to England, where they basically ended up meeting with other Jews that were Freemasons and creating modern Freemasonry, which is speculative Freemasonry. I talk about that in my Synagogue of Satan series. But some of them also left in other places too. And there is some evidence that they left to the area that is now Switzerland and basically created some operations there. The question is this: you can look at that yourself. Of course, there's these things are not, you're not going to, for that particular thing, you're not going to find a Wikipedia article. But nevertheless, ask yourself the following questions. Why is Switzerland the banking capital of the world when the Templars are the ones who created modern, basically investment banking? Ask yourself why Switzerland was neutral and it stays out of wars when it's in the middle of everything and it doesn't basically get hurt. Why are the Zionist conventions in Switzerland of all places? Well, because the answer is that Zionism is Jesuitism. Switzerland is a papal state. It's a papal colony. It's a Templar base. And of course, all the banking is there because if you understand that the Templars are the ones who created the modern system of banks, then it all makes sense. The Jews are not the banksters. That's just the shield. That's the scapegoat. The true banksters are the Templars because they got super wealthy from the Crusades and they had to have a place to store all of this wealth, and they created the modern system of banking. And that eventually led to many other things, but nevertheless, Switzerland is a very interesting place. And of course, the first congresses of Zionism was in Switzerland. Ask yourself why. That's an interesting question. Now let's talk about World War II. Many people don't realize the connections between the Catholic Church and Nazi Germany. And of course, there's a lot to talk about. I'm not going to talk about absolutely everything, but there is enough to talk about. Nazi Germany was propped up by the Vatican as an opposition to communism, which of course, you remember the Jesuits are the ones who brought communism in the first place to the world. Also, I think as a test of their image of the beast. It was kind of like a dry run of the image of the beast through Nazi Germany. It failed, just like Napoleon failed, so they had to basically let the world go dark with the liberal world order so that it could swing to the light or to the right, which is what's happening now. Anyway, the Roman Catholic Church had a very sordid relationship with Nazi Germany. And on one hand, the Nazi radicals initially persecuted Catholics and Catholic churches, and they had some concordance and agreements. And on the other, you had many Germans who were Catholic, and the papacy, especially Pius XII, was very much pro-Hitler. The Nazis helped to form modern state of Israel. They also helped to form the modern military-industrial complex, like the CIA, FBI, NASA, things of this nature. So let's look at a couple resources. This is an article from PBS. It says, Vatican documents show a secret back channel between Pope Pius XII and Hitler. This is mainstream news. This is in 2022. A series of recently opened Vatican archives are shedding new light on the relationship between Pope Pius XII and Hitler as he led Nazi Germany during World War II. A new book takes a deeper look at these revelations. Historian David Kurtzner, author of The Pope at War, The Secret History of the Pope Pius XII, Mussolini, and Hitler, joins Anna Nawaz to discuss. So if this is mainstream, then imagine what you can find if you do a little digging. Pope Pius XII especially was very pro-Hitler. Pius XI before him, he was kind of hands-off. Nevertheless, Pius XII had some very interesting connections to Hitler, and you can look into that yourself. There's a book, I think, called Hitler's Pope. I forget who it was written by, but there's many such things like this. These things are easily discoverable now. They're not on mainstream yet, but you can find them if you dig deep enough. This is Franz von Papen, and let's read about him. He was a German politician, diplomat, Prussian nobleman, and army officer. A national conservative, he served the Chancellor of Germany in 1932, and then as Vice Chancellor under Adolf Hitler from 1933 to 1934. Papen is largely remembered for his role in bringing Hitler to power. That's the important thing you need to know about Papen, because we're going to learn a little bit more about him as we go. Born into a wealthy and powerful family in Westphalian Catholic aristocrats, Papen served in the Prussian army from 1898 onward and was trained as an officer of the German General Staff. He served as a military attaché in Mexico and the United States from 1913 to 1915, while also covertly organizing acts of sabotage in the United States and quietly backing and financing Mexican forces in the Mexican Revolution on behalf of the German military intelligence. Boy, he was a really busy guy, wasn't he? After being expelled as a persona non grata by the United States Department in 1915, he served as a battalion commander on the Western Front of World War I and finished his war service in the Middle Eastern Theater as a lieutenant colonel. Asked to become a chancellor of the Weimar Republic by President Paul von Hindenburg in 1932, Papen ruled by presidential decree. He launched the Prussian-Schlag coup against the Social Democratic Party-led government by the Free State of Prussia. His failure to secure a base of support in the Reichstag led to his removal by Hindenburg and replacement by General Kurt von Schleicher. Determined to return to power and regain his wealth, Papen, believing that Adolf Hitler could be controlled once he was in government, pressured Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as a chancellor and Papen as a vice-chancellor in 1933 in a cabinet ostensibly not under Nazi Party domination. Seeing military dictatorship as the only alternative to a Nazi Party chancellor, Hindenburg consented. Papen and his allies were quickly marginalized by Hitler, and he left the government after the Night of Long Knives purge in 1934, during which the Nazis killed some of his allies and confidants. Subsequently, Papen served the German Foreign Office as the ambassador in Vienna from 1934 to 1938, in Ankara from 1939 to 1944. He joined the Nazi Party in 1938. After the Second World War, Papen was indicted for Nazi war crimes in Nuremberg trials before the International Military Tribunal, but was acquitted of all charges. I wonder why. In 1947, a West German denazification court found Papen to have acted as the main culprit in the crimes relating to the Nazi government. Papen was given a sentence of 8 years imprisonment and hard labor, but was released on appeal in 1949. Franz von Papen's memoirs were published in 1952 and 1953. He died in 1969. Now, important to know about him is this. Let's go to post-war years. And you got to dig a little bit, but you can find it. Papen unsuccessfully tried to restart his political career in the 1950s. He lived in the castle of Benzenhofen near Ravensburg in Upper Swabia. Pope John the 23rd restored his title of Papal Chamberlain in 24th July 1959. So he had a title of Papal Chamberlain. Now he's got it restored. Papen was also a Knight of Malta. There it is. And he was awarded the Grand Cross of the Pontifical Order of Pius IX. So he was a Knight of Malta. That's an important thing to remember. And he was instrumental in bringing Hitler to power. Very important point. Next one on the list is the ideology of the SS. Let's read about the ideology of the SS. And here it is. The SS placed an intense emphasis in their indoctrination upon elitism and portrayed themselves as part of an elite order which explicitly modeled themselves on a historical version of religious orders such as the Teutonic Knights, i.e. kind of like the Knights Templar, or the Jesuits, who dedicated to a higher idea, whose dedication to a higher idea was admired in these otherwise anti-clerical circles. So that's why I said this is, it's a very schizophrenic system. On one hand, these people persecuted some of the Catholic buildings and institutions and Catholics in the beginning. But on the other hand, they were also enamored with the Knights Templar, with the Jesuits, and so on and so forth. I think there was another quote on here. Was their attitude towards religion? Here we go. Here it is. Himmler used the Jesuits as the model for the SS since he found that they had the core elements of absolute obedience and the cult of organization. Hitler is said to have called Himmler my Ignatius of Loyola. So was Hitler in love with the Jesuit order? Was Himmler in love with the Jesuit order? Absolutely. So they had this fetish and this desire to basically be like a modern day Knights Templar, basically Catholic revival, but not really Catholic. It's just one weird schizophrenic system. But nevertheless, here's another article on New Dawn magazine, the ex-Nazis who helped the CIA and Mossad. Let's see. You're unlikely to find him featured from the front and center in high school history textbook, but Reinhard Gehlen was an important and complex historical figure who had a surprisingly large impact on the history of the 20th century. He's also the key to unlocking a very unsettling trend in history, supposedly sworn enemies working together on a dime if the benefits outweigh the costs. Gehlen was a storied historical figure of the Cold War and a man, to be precise, a former Nazi of many talents. He headed intelligence gathering on the Eastern Front during his career as a major general in the Wehrmacht during the Second World War, which ironically turned out to be exceedingly useful to the West. It took Gehlen only 3 months after the total defeat of the Third Reich in June 1945 to land a job in America. He was a consummate risk-taker and successfully pitched himself as the perfect man to help the United States stand up to the USSR after the war because of his trove of knowledge on Stalin's state. What he offered was a vast network of former Nazi spies and intelligence assets that would fill America's arrow quiver in fighting the looming Soviet empire. Gehlen was flown out of Germany to Fort Hunt, Virginia, in contravention of Allied promises at the Yalta Conference that they would hand over any German officers that they got a hold of the Soviets if those officers had worked in the Eastern Theater of the war. The next year, in 1946, Gehlen returned to Germany and headed up the organization, or the Gehlen Organization. He boosted U.S. spy operations in NATO in their covert operations and information war against the USSR. The org included numerous former Nazis and SS men, some of whom were war criminals like Alois Brenner, who sent hundreds of thousands of Jews, well, I don't really believe that, concentration camps. The SS Major General and Jew killer Emil Augsburg, who was listed in 1952, internal CIA documents as an aficionado of good food and wine with an unprejudiced mind and an honest temperament. There's your upstanding gentleman right there. Gehlen later became the first president of the West Germany spy agency, the BND. From 1956 to 1968, the BND employed an estimated minimum of 100 former Gestapo and SS officers, including former SS head Heinrich Himmler's daughter and lifelong Nazi supporter Gudrun Burwitz, from 1961 to 1963. They also hired the Butcher of Lyon SS torturer Klaus Barbie, who had already been working for the U.S. as an anti-communist spy from his hiding place in Bolivia by the late 1940s. Moral scruples were not exactly in order of the day at this juncture of history, to put it mildly. You can read about Operation Paperclip, hopefully you know about that already. Nazis and Zionists, let's read about that. Rather unsettlingly, Israel was also a key partner of ex-Nazi war criminals. You don't say. Indeed, Gehlen's organization of ex-Nazis helped Israel plan and succeed in its devastating surprise attack on Egypt and ensuing victory during the Six-Day War in 1967. Using ex-Nazis to reach out and appeal to German scientists working for Egypt, Israel intimidated and killed off its enemies who were helping the Arabs mount a threat against them. The Mossad certainly had no scruples about working with war criminals, for example, enlisting the help of former SS commando and apple of Hitler's eye Otto Skorzeny to kill scientists who were helping Egypt develop a missile program in the 1960s. All peas in a pod, folks. Don't let them deceive you into thinking that these things are different than what they actually are. The Mossad got Skorzeny to work for them in a masterful recruitment operation, playing on his need for adventure and risk, and some think on some lingering feelings of guilt about persecuting of Jews, which he may have held from his war years. Interestingly, the Americans and British were flabbergasted and angry when Israel captured Adolf Eichmann in Argentina in 1960. The CIA, who reportedly knew Eichmann's whereabouts and alias years before Mossad, panicked after he was taken. They were worried Eichmann could expose various agents working for the Gehlen organization who had been his accomplices, including Otto Albrecht von Bolschwing. More generally, the Americans were very worried about having their dealings with Nazis brought into the limelight, and it's still not exactly the highlight of the history's textbooks. So, the U.S., the Mossad, here's a coin of the six-pointed star club, and on the other side you have basically the swastika. So this is a commemorative coin of the Havara transfer agreement, which we'll read about in a minute, but these things tell you that things are not what they seem. That there seems to be this conflict and division and dialectics when in fact there's actually a hidden hand behind all of these things. Here's our friend Otto Skorzeny. Look at that winning smile. Looks like he's about to kill you. And let's see what we're going to look on this. Early life, something about... Okay, here it is. I didn't highlight this section, but if you look under his death, it's not a lot about him, but if you look under his death, there's something very meaningful. He was given a Catholic funeral in Madrid on 7th August 1975. His body was then cremated and his ashes were later taken to Vienna to be interred in the Skorzeny family plot at Doblinger Friedhof. His funerals in Madrid and Vienna were attended by former SS colleagues who gave the Nazi salute and also sang some of Hitler's favorite songs. So he was given a Catholic funeral. I think that's interesting. Reinhard Gehlen, let's see, was a military intelligence officer, later dubbed Hitler's super spy, who served the Weimar Republic, Nazi Germany, and also worked for the United States during the early years of the Cold War. Now, is there something? That's right, honors. We want to look at honors for Mr. Gellin, who was very, very active and important for lots of shenanigans for the CIA and, even, influencing Middle Eastern things. So he was a very influential person. Now, what honors did Mr. Gellin get? Right here you read Grand Cross of the Order Pro Merito Melitensi of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, 1948. Oops, I clicked on that. So he got the Grand Cross. He got quite the honor as a Knight of Malta member. He is also a Knight of Malta member. Are you starting to see something very important? That on the front you see Nazi, you see Jew, you see Mossad, you see CIA, when in fact they're all playing ball for the same power. One more, Charles Joseph Bonaparte. Everybody knows about the CIA, but do you know this? Was an active, and the FBI as well, was an American lawyer and political activist for progressive and liberal causes of French noble descent. Originally from Baltimore, Maryland, he served in the cabinet of the 26th U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt. He was a descendant of the House of Bonaparte. His grandfather was Jérôme Bonaparte, brother of Emperor Napoleon, and his grandmother was Elizabeth Patterson Bonaparte. Bonaparte was the U.S. Secretary of the Navy and later the U.S. Attorney General. During his tenure as Attorney General, he formed the Bureau of Investigation, now with the FBI. Bonaparte was one of the founders and, for a time, the president of the National Municipal League. He was also an activist for the voting rights of black residents of his native city of Baltimore. So, a Bonaparte Catholic started basically the FBI. And the CIA is started also, or influenced by, a Knight of Malta member. Here's William Joseph Donovan, called Wild Bill. Let's read. Major General William, this is from militaryhallofonor.com. Major General William Joseph Wild Bill Donovan was a U.S. Army officer who received the U.S. military's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor, for his heroic actions during World War I. Donovan is best remembered as the wartime head of the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA. And it says here, the prototype of the Central Intelligence Agency. He's also known as the father of American intelligence and the father of Central Intelligence. Very important figure. Let's read a little more about him. In the early years, William attended St. Joseph's College Institute and Niagara University before starring on the football team of Columbia University. Okay. On the field, he got the nickname that would stick with him for the rest of his life, Wild Bill Donovan. He graduated from Columbia in 1905 and was a member of the Phi Kappa Psi fraternity, as well as the, let's highlight it, Knights of Malta. You don't say. So the FBI, the CIA, and all the Nazis who were involved in putting Hitler to power, and then afterwards starting these various organizations and secret clubs, whether it was for the United States or whether it was for Israel, all of them are Catholic Knights of Malta Secret Order members. You don't say, I wonder how that works. Here's another picture of these coins. These souvenir coins were basically the six-pointed star, and on the back you have the Nazi swastika, which tells you what? Tells you the two wings of the same bird, just like you have democracy, quote-unquote Democrats and Republicans, red versus blue. It's just an illusion, folks. And in the back, they're all secret society members playing their part. When the vote to establish the state of Israel was 33-13, what do you think that means? That is Freemasonic satanic numerology that they're basically revealing to you that both sides of the occult were playing their part. The York Rite and the Scottish Rite, 33 levels and 13 levels, respectively. I believe. Well, Scottish Rite is, I think, 33, and York Rite is 13. Yeah. 33 for the Scottish and 13 for York Rite. One of them is dark, one of them is light, one of them is pro, one of them is against. You play your part. You're the Satan. You're the accuser. They're supposed to say no while the other one is saying yes, but together you're working together to create the outcome. Do you get it? It's all this one same thing. Now, one more Havara agreement. You can read about this on Wikipedia. Was an agreement between Nazi Germany and Zionist organizations signed on 25 August 1933. The agreement was finalized after 3 months of talks by the Zionist Federation of Germany, the Anglo-Palestine Bank, under directive of the Jewish Agency, and the economic authorities of Nazi Germany. It was a major factor in making possible the migration of 60,000 German Jews to Palestine between 1933 and 1939. So, what do we put all that together? Well, Nazi Germany was a Jesuit project designed to move the agenda forward, like all things. Just like Napoleon, Hitler was a messianic figure that negotiated the settlement of tens of thousands of Jews to Palestine and set up the framework for the state of Israel to be born. Hitler was also part Rothschild, so that's an important point. We know that he was enamored with the Jesuit order and had kind of a weird fetish with them. Catholics are going to deny that the Vatican had any dealings with Hitler, and of course they're going to whitewash that, but it's not true. Pope Pius XII especially had a lot of dealings and was very supportive of Hitler. And of course the Jesuits and Catholic orders were very instrumental in helping the Nazis reintegrate into various other schemes. As you clearly have seen, all of these military industrial complex units were formed by people from Nazis, that were Knights of Malta members. So behind the scenes, you have on the front you have this organization, that organization, this belief system, that belief system. There's so much variety, when in fact all of these go back to one hydra with multiple heads. And I hope that you're starting to see that hydra. Pius XI was a little more hands-off with Hitler, but nevertheless, he was still basically involved in trying to negotiate various things with Nazi Germany. Of course, through Hitler and the Rothschilds, the Jesuits accomplished their goal of a Jewish state finally. And ever since then, it's been 80 years of liberalism and Zionism and everything else designed to push on the world in a particular direction so that all these things could then be exposed and collapsed. But never in a million years did anyone think that this would happen. Never in a million years. Now, because of all these deceptions, people believe it's Bible prophecy unfolding. Of course, that's also changing because dispensationalism is collapsing as well. But you need to realize that Zionist Israel is not something that just came about because the Jews own the world, okay? Rome owns the world. The Jews were nothing until the French Revolution, when the Rothschilds were puppeted and basically became the guardians of the papal treasure. Remember, the Rothschilds aren't even actually Jews. They're just faking to be Jews. But the Jews were nothing, and the Jews are used as the scapegoat. Zionist Israel is really just a papal crusade. It's a crusade in the Middle East. Why? To get rid of the Muslims and the Jews. There's nothing new under the sun, folks. The Crusades were there to take the Holy Land for the papacy. They failed, and so this is just another crusade that is simultaneously there to create a conflict, to get rid of the extremists on both sides. Think about it. Think about this very, very clearly. If you understand who rules the world, which is Rome, and you understand what Rome wants and what Rome has done in the past, this is a 10th crusade. This crusade is there to create conflict so that the extremist Muslims and the extremist Jews annihilate each other. Then what's left? Well, you have the moderates that are okay with culture shaping, prosperity, conversion, things like that. So destroy the Jews and Muslims who are extreme. The ones who are moderate, integrate them into this new reality. And in the process, also crusade against Protestantism, because this entire shenanigan is going to completely destroy Protestantism, because Protestantism thinks that the Jews are God's chosen people. So it is a crusade. And that crusade is being done in a very different way, but nevertheless, it's a crusade. So the Zionist Israel is not something that just happened because the Jews owned the world. Zionist Israel was a carefully plotted and planned Jesuit Templar operation. A Jesuit Templar crusade to destroy Protestantism, to destroy Jews, to destroy Muslims. And ultimately, by creating all these dialectics, they can bring about their final solution, which will be the Catholic New World Order. So all of this is playing out before our eyes, folks. All of this is playing out before our eyes. I hope that you are able to see it. A couple final thoughts for you. There is much to discuss, and you could probably spend your whole life looking at all the connections between the Jesuits and Zionism, the Vatican, after World War II, and so on. I'm not going to do that. People know, for example, about Kennedy and the Mossad. That's really coming out now, or the USS Liberty. But they don't realize that Satan is very clever, and that it's not just the Jews, that there is a secret shadow network filled with all kinds of people who say they're one thing or another, but in fact, they're actually worshiping the devil. At the deepest level, they're worshiping the devil. They're all on the same team. If Satan is the god of this world, do you think that most people are going to discover his plans? He's not. He's the master of deception. And God has allowed the devil to deceive most of the world. Therefore, what you're seeing, when you're seeing these big exposés and everybody's waking up and getting, red-pilled, is actually controlled demolition, which is very important. So, no, people are not going to wake up to these things. Most will be deceived. That means that the obvious stuff that you see is a half-truth at best. It's designed to bait you in a particular direction. Helena Blavatsky said the Jesuits were using more black magic than anybody in history. In my Synagogue of Satan series, I detail the history of the Jesuits, the Jesuit oath, their involvement in countless intrigues, revolutions, communism, everything. They're the ones who started the United Nations. They're the ones who started the charismatic movement and weaponized it. They're the ones who influenced the prosperity movement. They're the ones who started heliocentrism. They're the ones who created Hollywood. They're the ones who created all these revolutions. Everything, the New Age movement. Teilhard de Chardin was one of the main influencers of the modern New Age movement. Everything comes back to Rome one way or another. Why? Because the Bible is true. The mother of abominations. It always comes back to Rome because the devil gave his throne to Rome. Therefore, all of the abominations are coming out of Rome one way or another. Anyone not talking about the Jesuits in their various explanations of news or end times events or whatever else and is focusing just on the Jews is either controlled opposition or just ignorant of history and scripture. Every major revolution or war in the last 500 years has had a Jesuit somewhere. Every major deception and psyop in the last 500 years has been tied to the Jesuits somehow because they've been extremely active in the world. All of these people, you need to understand, are secret society members. There are countless orders, clubs, organizations, governmental systems. They're all just shadow fronts for a shadow government in the back that operates according to things that you don't see. It's a shadow government. So Satan has an exoteric government and an esoteric government. The exoteric government is the Catholic Church, which is actually the empire. It is the fifth and final empire on the face of the earth. It operates exoterically, meaning outside, on the outside. It seems like it operates as a church, as the will of God, when in fact it is an empire, it's a kingdom. And that empire has its various rankings and knights that defend the empire, and warriors and soldiers and military that is disguised as priests and people who are serving God. That is why it is a synagogue of Satan. Synagogue of Satan does not mean that you're looking at the Jews and all the Jews are doing. Synagogue is a place where people gather to worship God. And the first Christians were Jews. So that means the synagogues, at least the first ones, were where Christians were gathering to worship God and read the scriptures, rejoice, have fellowship, praise Jesus. Of course, they eventually got kicked out of the synagogues, but synagogue is supposed to be a place where you worship God. And Paul says that the real Jew is the one who's circumcised by the heart. Therefore, the definition of Jew is actually Christian, according to the New Testament. To be a Jew means to be a Christian. That means if you're consistent with your interpretations and not easily baited and rage baited by all the Jewish propaganda and anti-Jewish propaganda, if you're consistent, then what the book of Revelation is revealing to you 50 plus years after Paul wrote those words about who a true Jew is, and the original Christians were Jews, that means what the book of Revelation is revealing to you is something much more spiritual and profound. Because the main problem of the church age is counterfeit faith. It's counterfeit believers. It's counterfeit Christianity. Why? Because Satan gave his throne and power to a counterfeit Christian church and infiltrated the plan of God and created his own counterfeit as a result. That is the issue, is counterfeit Christian realities. The Jews who reject Jesus openly, who cares? They're going to be destroyed. It's the ones who say that they are worshiping Jesus, but actually are not. That is the problem. Who say they are Jews, but are not. Do you get it? That's the true meaning of Synagogue of Satan. I have a whole 25 plus hour series on that. But nevertheless, these things are coming to pass, and they are predicted a long time ago. The Bible predicted these things. Protestantism has been so infiltrated and destroyed by Christian Zionism and all the wokery that's happened that this is the last straw. Zionism collapsing is the last straw on the camel's back, and Protestantism is over. The Zionist agenda is so obvious now. It's so obvious. It's glaringly obvious. And that's by design, because people are going back to religion. People are talking about crusades. I see these channels that are selling like shirts with like crusaders on them. We're going backwards in time, folks. Do you feel it? We're going backwards in time. It's crazy. People want a theocracy again. They want hardcore religious values again. They want to force people to believe the way they believe. And of course, this is just the beginning. The two-party system has become so obviously rigged. It was always rigged, but now it's obviously rigged. People are crying more and more for a authoritarian type of ruling. We'll see what happens with Trump at the time of this video. I don't know what's going to happen with him, whether they're going to keep him or they're going to use him and basically kick him out and basically use him in the same way that they used Biden to basically make people believe that this two-party system is a joke. No matter how you vote, it's pointless. So we just need somebody who's loyal to God and, can be a king, which is exactly what they want. We'll see how that turns out. There's certainly some evidence in that regard that we're moving in that direction. But nevertheless, a monarch who is there is going to pledge his power to the papacy, just as it was before. You just got to look in history. For 1,000 years, the monarchs were pledging their powers to the papal power. The King of Kings, the counterfeit King of Kings. So slowly and carefully, the Jesuits have undone what they did 250 years ago with the French Revolution. Liberalism has collapsed. People want traditional values back. Democracy is collapsing. People want religion and basically a theocratic type of situation and nationalism back. Capitalism is collapsing. People want a solution. They don't want communism and they don't want capitalism. Well, the counterfeit narrow road between these two dialectics is Catholic social teaching that seems to solve all of the social problems, has morality, helps the people, of course, according to the common good. And of course, Zionism is collapsing and destroying and discrediting Protestantism with it. And as a result, pushing people back into religion. Do you see how all these things are so carefully orchestrated? It is truly profound. You have to marvel at how evil these people are and how they must be in contact with Satan to be able to coordinate all of these things simultaneously into a grand finale. It's quite the thing. But nevertheless, they've been patiently coordinated for a very long time. And now they're all intersecting into one big, explosion, one big finale, one big reveal, which of course is the resurrection of the beast. The Jews and Muslims will be converted through a charismatic revival in the Middle East. They have to be. And of course, Zionism was there as the dark hand to destroy Gaza, reveal, all of these ugly things to the world and initiate them into the new reality, while also setting the stage for Gaza to be rebuilt into a resort town where people could migrate and the charismatic cross-pollination can happen. Do you see how these two work? Do you see how the 13 and the 33 work together? Of course, if you look in Israel and you look at Iran, you look at all these people, they all have Freemason pyramids and Freemasonry everywhere. It's all one big club with the outside seeming like there's the tentacles fighting against each other when in fact it's just owned by the same hand. It's literally it's like if I have my hand and I wave it to you at the camera like this, and I'm waving my fingers and I'm going like this and I'm going like that, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, those fingers are just all crazy with one another. In fact, you don't really see the palm. Do you get it? You don't see the palm waving the fingers. You just see the fingers doing their thing. This is exactly what's happening with reality, folks. It's all one big satanic shadow government. And of course, the Bible tells you where that government is based. It's in Rome. So it's all coming to a head, and because most people have been baited by the obvious evils, they're going to think that the coming thing that is coming, when this resolves, will be the will of God. And we've made it. We're a Christianizing society. We've got a golden age. We've got prosperity. We've made it, folks. We've solved all the dialectics. And in fact, that solution is actually the final trick. So don't be tricked. Historicism is the only way to interpret the scriptures. And when you do that, it points you directly to Rome as the Antichrist power on the earth and the fulfillment of all of these warnings. The fifth and final empire of Daniel 2, the man of lawlessness, the beast from the sea, and so on and so forth. And that power is going to be worshipped and obeyed again as the will of God, as the presence of God on earth. It's coming, folks. So learn the truth and help your friends wake up, because Satan is cashing all of his chips in. All of his chips are being cashed in. And if you aren't wise, you're going to be sucked into the delusion. Those who don't have the Spirit are going to be deceived by all of these political and social and governmental and economic signs and wonders. There's many signs and wonders. It's going to be a sign and wonder when the Jews convert and the Muslims convert. And there's prosperity. And we all have, blockchain, commerce, and everything's going to be great. And oh my gosh, everybody's got money. It's going to be a sign and wonder. It's going to be a beautiful sign and wonder. And that's why it's so dangerous. However, you know better, and I hope that you will not be deceived. So, hope you learned something today. Take care. We'll see you next time. God bless.